Greetings, everyone. Greetings. Hello, audience. How are you? I'm going to take my mask off so you can hear me. It is January 7th, 2021. This is our first during post-pandemic speaker night presentation. Tonight we have one of our presenters that's been here many times before, and I hope the audience enjoys her. And you folks that are at home on YouTube watching this will enjoy her as well. So we will be presenting more speaker nights presentations via the YouTube vehicle in the future, and hopefully you watch more. At this time, I'd like to introduce Chris Enss, who many of you have seen and heard before. So let's give her a round of applause. Chris, all yours.
Well, thank you so much. I always enjoy coming and do a presentation for the Nevada County Historical Society. I'm always grateful that you want to come and have me back again and hear me prattle on about my favorite subject, which is about women in history in the American West. They accomplished so many wonderful things, and I have unearthed some amazing things that these women have done throughout the course of my years of doing it, whether they would be women entertainers, the great singers and dancers and actresses, or whether they were incredible outlaws like Belle Starr, Calamity Jane, or whether or not they were mail-order brides. I've also spent some time doing some wonderful research on just the prostitution of the Old West. As a matter of fact, I look back through my 50-plus books, and most of them are on prostitution, so I don't know what that says about me, but you know, it is a fascinating subject. I'm going to be working on a book about the brothel in Deadwood. I don't know whether anybody has seen that television show Deadwood, but there was a gentleman by the name of Al Swearingen who owned the gym in Deadwood, and he had a brothel above his theater, saloon theater. And the Historical Society there bought the brothel and are redoing it to be a museum. And so I'm doing a book about it. It's going to be called Behind the Beige Door. That particular brothel didn't close until the 1940s. So it basically opened up for business in 1860 something and was in business right up until the 40s. So I'm excited once again to be writing about the world's oldest profession. So that being said, thank you all very much for being here. The recent book that I have completed and comes out officially next month is called Iron Women, Ladies Who Built the American Railroad. It really should say ladies who built and influenced the American Railroad, because the women that I'm going to share with you were not necessarily women who went in with a hammer and nails and saws and put the railroad together and laid tracks and surveyed land. In fact, when the Transcontinental Railroad was completed in May 1869, and they were hammering in that golden spike to complete it all, and cameras were there and people were mobbing the scene, they made a point in being able to say women hadn't any hand in this particular process. They didn't survey any land and they didn't lay any track. So they made a big deal about the fact that women had no hand in it. And the reason was because suffrage was gaining a great deal of momentum in the West. And this was their way of being able to say, you know, if women really deserved a right to vote, they would have some sort of influence over this substantial form of transportation. They might not have had it up until 1869, but I promise you, from 1869 till today, women have had and played a substantial role in making the travel by train what it is today. In the book, I have written about amazing women who did a variety of things for the train, as I said, influenced it. Some of the women that I've written about are inventors, and one of my favorite inventors that I wrote about, her name was Eliza Murphy. And Eliza Murphy was an inventor who created a device to improve the way bearings on the rail wheel and the axle with the train responded. And it was called packing. is what it was called. Packing was used to lubricate the axles and the bearings. Before that, there just wasn't anything like that. And it was just a very rough start. It made travel very uncomfortable. Even though, as I said, the rail line finished in 1869, a lot of people weren't getting on board, and that's because it was uncomfortable for those reasons. I wrote about Nancy P. Wilkerson, who invented the cattle car. And I know a lot of people are like, the cattle car, what do you need a cattle car for? You just put the cattle, you drive the cattle from Texas all up through Oklahoma, get them into Dodge City, pack them onto trains, and then you get them out of town. But it wasn't that easy. You needed to have your livestock alive when it got from Dodge all the way to the East Coast. And a lot of times those animals expired because there was no place for feed and water to be. So Nancy P. Wilkerson invented the cattle car, which with rack and pinion mechanisms, she invented these sliding partitions that separated the livestock from their feed and water. So they were able to get from point A to point B just as fat and happy as they were when they were loaded onto the train. And it was important for Nancy, and she didn't necessarily do this just because there are some people who said, well, she was trying to be humane to the animals. That might have been a sub idea of what it is that she was focused on, but indeed that wasn't it. Her husband was a rancher, and he made a living off of the cattle and getting them to market and getting the top price for them. And you couldn't get the top price for them, as I said, if they were ailing in any way. And so she invents this particular mechanism, which is just ingenious. One of the other ladies that I've written about in the book, let me find her picture because these ladies are so sweet. This is Mary Pennington. And Dr. Mary Pennington was a scientist. She dealt primarily in spores and molds. But she was fascinated with the preservation of food and how to get food from one part of the country to the next part of the country, and it wouldn't have spoiled, no moldings or anything like that. And she invented the modern day refrigerator car. And the refrigerator car, there's lovely pictures in the book of her on the refrigerator, on the top of these refrigerator cars. And she's testing the ventilation in the refrigerator car. She's doing all the things on top as it's going. She's writing on top to make sure that everything is proper with us. She wasn't in an office inventing it and then handing it off to a guy and saying, go out and do it. I mean, she was very hands-on. And if not for her, our ability to get through World War I to feed our nation during World War I would not have been the way that as successful as it was without the invention of the refrigerator car. You were able to take produce from one part of the country to the next part of the country on the trains and have it be fresh as much as it could be. Have it be fresh when it got there and not different parts of the country without citrus. So, I mean, just key elements like that of women who influenced the American Railroad. I've written in here about Lily Langtry. I wrote about Lily Langtry being this amazing entertainer, and indeed she was. But Lily traveled from point A to point B across the country in her own privately made car, and that particular car was called the Lali. And the Lali was hugely popular. And people who knew that Lily Langtry was coming into town on the Lali would race to the train depots so they could see the Lali. And when they did, they would subsequently buy tickets, thinking that when they got on the train, it would be the Lali. Of course, it wasn't anything like that. But so, I mean, Lily Langtry really took advantage of all of the fineries that some of these ladies made. One of the women in the book is Olive Dennis, and Olive Dennis worked for the Baltimore and Oregon Railroad. And she was phenomenal because they hire her because they can't get people to buy a ticket in Cleveland and go to New Mexico. It was just when men put it together, I mean, it was basically the interior looked like a couple of barrels with some benches, some wood there. That's where you sat, enjoy yourself, you're not strapped down. Here's, if you need to go to the bathroom, here's a bucket. Olive Dennis came on and she invented incandescent lighting that would be over the seats. She invented ventilation that would be about the seats. She invented these amazing chairs that would fit in the train where you could relax and pivot, and not only could you relax and pivot, but you could lay them out flat and flip them over and they became a bed. I mean, she was just ingenious in being able to make this a form of transportation that everybody would find attractive. By 1877, there were still a lot of people not taking the trains, and these gentlemen who were stockholders and owned train lines, they were frustrated about the fact that they couldn't get people to get on the trains. I mean, it wasn't very long. It was just a mere 8 years from the time that the railroad came into existence to, saying, how do we get people to be a part of this? Maryam Leslie, this is a great picture of Maryam Leslie. Maryam Leslie was married to a gentleman by the name of Frank Leslie. And for anybody who is familiar with the history of the Old West, or you go into antique stores and you go through some of the old newspapers, you'll see Frank Leslie's illustrated newspapers. And he owned several different type of newspapers. They were all illustrated. Frank owned 5 of them. His wife Maryam worked for one, and that was primarily geared, that particular illustrated magazine was geared specifically towards women. And the rail line were really trying to market to women. And Maryam Leslie was not entirely faithful to her husband. She spent a lot of time romantically involved with some of these railroad tycoons who would then share with her the different problems about, we can't get anybody to be on these trains. What do we do? Maryam Leslie thought, here's what we're going to do. In 1877, she pulled together 10 to 12 artists, poets, songwriters, photographers. She pulled all these people together and said, we are going to take the train from New York to San Francisco. It's going to be a 5-month journey, and we're going to record everything along the way. Maryam Leslie said that she would write about the journey. The other people aboard said that they would paint pictures of the journey. Some would write poems about the journey. Some would write incredible songs. I mean, if Arlo Guthrie was around at that time, he probably would have been hired on to be a part of this entourage that goes from New York to San Francisco. But as I said, it was a 5-month journey. Now, I'll find the picture. Here it is. Again, Maryam knows what the trains are like, and she's not going to sit on a barrel seat. And so she hires a gentleman by the name of Senator Wagner to invent and to construct what we know as the Wagner car, the Wagner dining car, the Wagner sleeping car, but it was very lush and luxurious. You can see these are velvet seats with tufts. You can see the gas chandeliers are lighting from the ceiling, the decorated ceilings themselves, the carpet. So she had him design several of those so all of these people could travel in style. And they did travel in style. Along with that, I'm going to find this other picture here. In addition to all of those fineries that I just showed you, here was one that was most important. It was a fully functioning restroom. This is a wonderful picture of one of the women that Maryam Leslie traveled with. It's just her in the bathroom to show you how lush it is. You can stand up in front of the sink and brush your hair. It's not small, it's not minuscule. You don't have to worry about where can you go to the restroom. It's a very plush thing. So, as I said, it took 5 months, this trip. It wouldn't ordinarily have taken 5 months, but it took 5 months because they made all these stops and she's writing a book. So They get all the way from New York to San Francisco, and then they take the train back. When Maryam Leslie and everybody gets in New York, Maryam Leslie has kept this journal along the way. She turns it into a book called My Pleasure Trip from Gotham to the Golden Gate. And it sells out. Everyone buys this book. It's a huge bestseller. And people are flocking to train depots to buy tickets. And it is said that Maryam Leslie did more for train travel in the 19th century than any other woman, just because of that book. And you know, she was a great businesswoman and figured out even how to work the system after her husband dies, not too long after that. And of course she inherits the Frank Leslie illustrated newspaper archives and everything that he had. She inherits that. And she decides that what she's going to do then is she's going to legally change her name from Maryam Leslie to Frank Leslie. So now she's Frank Leslie. So she travels around the United States. So now when you talk about Frank Leslie, it's not a guy anymore, it's really Maryam Leslie. But just this incredible talent with marketing. And even though, as I said, she didn't lay track, she didn't survey any land, but she does more for train travel than any woman in the 19th century. You go from someone like Maryam Leslie to our very own Sarah Kidder. And Sarah Kidder was right here in our own Grass Valley. Sarah Kidder is married to John Kidder, and if any man in 1901 had asked about women in business, he'd be laughed at, and they would have said, well, women don't know anything about business. They're supposed to be at home, taking care of the family, and that's what they know. They don't. That's not their bailiwick. But thank heavens, Sarah Kidder was a good businesswoman, and her husband John recognized that, because when John passes away, he leaves her everything. He leaves her the percentage of the stock in the Nevada County narrow gauge railroad, the Never Come Never Go railroad. And it's unanimous after he passes away that she's going to take over and be the head of this particular company, which was a major boon economically for Nevada County, having that railroad here. Prior to that, Sarah Kidder is just known for this incredible mansion. She has an adopted daughter by the name of Beatrice. She's an incredible seamstress, so you often saw Sarah Kidder around town with Beatrice, and they'd be dressed in the exact same lace kind of outfits, because Sarah Kidder was an amazing seamstress. And so you'd have that excitement of watching. I mean, she was just a celebrity. Everywhere she went, people wanted to know more about her. She just was a gracious woman, had these incredible parties. And then, as I say, when John dies, she takes it over. And when she takes it over, her presidency of the California-Nevada County Narrow Gauge Railroad is known as the 12 Golden Years. And it's known as the 12 Golden Years because the line was more profitable than it had ever been, would ever be, and outdoing her late husband and the other people who would buy the line from her in 1913. She really was able to take over the line. She was able to build the line. She was able to pay her stockholders and pay off a substantial amount of debt. So the stockholders had a dividend. They had never had that before. When she was considering moving, I mean, there was a big, I've written some in the book about this, because there was a big fight between Kidder and another gentleman in town who said that he had helped come up with the idea of the railroad with Kidder, and so he should have some of this money from the railroad. So there was a big scandal with all of that. But even with all of that going on, Sarah Kidder rises above all of that and is able to make this a very prosperous railroad. Again, not a woman who laid any track, not a woman who surveyed any land, but built the railroad. And what's amazing about Sarah Kidder is, wherever it is that you're reading about railroads, and I did research in Harvard for some of this. You know where you find some information about Sarah Kidder? At Harvard. She was that influential in the railroad business. We go from there to, I want to read this next bit to you, read a bit from this, because not all influences with the American Railroad were good influences. There were a number of women who influenced the railroad, but they didn't do it in a nice way. The last train to be robbed in the United States was robbed in part by a woman, and her name was Laura Bullion. And I want to read to you a little bit about what happened with Laura Bullion, because Laura Bullion was a member of the Wild Bunch. And the Wild Bunch was Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And she was the mistress of one of the members of that gang, a guy by the name of Benjamin Kirkpatrick. So I'm going to put this out. Oh, you know what? I'll turn that in a minute. The Great Northern Railway Coast Flyer number 3 pulled away from the train depot in Malta, Montana at 11:45 on July 3rd, 1901. Malta was a typical cow town with a broad, rutted lane of brown dust running between a double row of false fronted frame buildings. Horses, their tails swishing idly at buzzing flies, stood hip-shot at the hitch racks that lined the front of every store. The Flyer was headed west to Wagner, Montana, a slightly bigger cow town that greatly resembled Malta, right down to the flies. Among the passengers traveling to Wagner was a train robber, Ben Blackie Kilpatrick. Kilpatrick was a member of outlaw Butch Cassidy's Wild Bunch gang. 2 additional Wild Bunch gang members were making the trip with Kirkpatrick, and those people were Harvey Kid Curry Logan and O.C. Hanks. Very well known. If you ever saw the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, they were the ones that were showing one another that they had been written up in the newspaper and reading it. So these gentlemen were those same gentlemen. Thomas Johns, the train's engineer, brought the vehicle to a sudden halt less than 6 miles east of Wagner. Logan had a revolver leveled at his head, encouraging him to stop. The gunman had snuck on board the tender car and onto the engine cab. The Flyer's fireman, Mike O'Neill, was with the engineer when he was overtaken, and neither man dared move a gun pointed at them. I want to show you, this is a shot of, this is a drawing. Oddly enough, this is a drawing done of that particular robbery, done by artists with Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper. So how everything connects in history is always fascinating to me. So this was Kirkpatrick getting on board, leveling a gun at these gentlemen, telling them to stop the train. And as soon as they stop the train, he orders them to uncouple the baggage car from the express car, because they're after the money that's in the express car. And once they get the express car uncoupled, the people in the passenger car are leaning their heads out the window to see what's going on. And Kirkpatrick and his gang start firing over their heads to make them go back in. So they're able to get the safe. They blow the safe. And inside the safe is $50,000. Now they have to make a very quick getaway. Who is the person waiting with the horses dressed as a man to help them get away? But Laura Bullion. So Laura Bullion and Kirkpatrick, they divide the money up very quickly, and they all take off in their separate ways. Laura goes with Kilpatrick to Missouri, and it isn't until the Pinkertons, I wrote about the Pinkertons in the book called The Pinks, but the Pinkertons catch up. They come and try to figure out what's, because they're on the trail anyway of Sundance and Butch Cassidy. So they have been trying to maneuver this, and they pick up on the trail, and they go to St. Louis, where now Laura Bullion is holed up in the hotel, waiting for things to simmer down a bit. Kilpatrick, not so much. He's out on the town spending that money. And as he's spending the money, the Pinkertons find out about it, and they go to the hotel to arrest Laura Bullion. Laura Bullion is not forthcoming about where Kilpatrick is, and the Pinkertons aren't 100% certain that it was Kilpatrick that she was with. Kilpatrick and the Sundance Kid looked a lot alike. And so what she did was, she lied to them and made them think that Kilpatrick had nothing to do with this, that it was all the Sundance Kid. Sure, he was someplace else, but it didn't make any difference. She put the blame on him, and so now they're out looking for the Sundance Kid. They're not looking for Ben Kilpatrick. But even through all of her efforts to help try and save her lover, it doesn't work because they eventually arrest both of them. Take her to trial. She gets 5 years. Kilpatrick gets 15. He's out in 11. She's waiting for him, hoping that he's turned over a new leaf, but indeed, he has not. The next job that he takes on is a bank robbery. And not too far from the bank is someone dressed as with wearing baggy men's clothing that everybody now thinks was Laura Bullion, but she didn't get caught there. Laura Bullion, after Kilpatrick is shot during this particular robbery and killed, and Laura Bullion goes on from there to Memphis, Tennessee, where she becomes a seamstress for a major department store. And that's how she lives out the rest of her life, as a seamstress working in a department store. I mean, and she lives quite a long while. But I mean, just amazing people, and how, as I say, history intersects. Because some of the women that I wrote about in the Pinks were on the job and trailing Laura Bullion to Missouri. So it all kind of, there's nothing small in history. So as I said, you have people like Laura Bullion who influenced the railroad for bad, and then you have the ladies that I told you about that influenced it for good. Another woman that she was bad, but it turned out her influence was for good, was a woman by the name of Julia Bulley. Now, Julia Bulley was a prostitute in Virginia City, Nevada. Very well liked. That prostitute with a heart of gold. Spent a great deal of time with the firemen. They never really say if she was really helping the firemen put out fires, but she spent so much time with the firemen that they gave her an honorary mascot position and gave her a helmet with the emblem of the city on there and a jacket, and she went wherever there was a fire. Julia went. They were absolutely devastated when a vagrant comes through Virginia City and breaks into Julia's home and murders Julia. He's subsequently hanged for what he has done. The whole town show up. She's so well loved. And then they start naming so many things in town after her. And one of the things that they name in town after her to preserve her memory was this amazing rail car, which is on display right now at the Railroad Museum there in Virginia City. And it would truck from Virginia City to Carson City. And people would come out to see the Julia Bulley car. And they would travel the rails if they could ride in Julia's car. So again, influence for travel on the American railroad system. One of my favorites, I want to go back, because this is a picture of the Transcontinental Railroad when it was completed on May 10th, 1869. It's probably not going to be very easy for everybody to see, but lots of pictures taken, very few women in them, if any at all. As I said, they made a big point in making sure that women were not photographed because they didn't have anything to do with it. And they didn't want anybody to associate women and the railroad. So I think that that's interesting, the departure that they wanted to make so no one would connect those two. But just fascinating with those kinds of truths. One of the women, the group of women that I wrote about that I was absolutely fascinated with I'm going to read to you this one too, because it's one of my favorite stories in the book. Fred Harvey was a businessman who hailed from the Leavenworth, Kansas area. And he was a cook at a small little restaurant there. And the trains would stop. And once in a while he'd be able to make a meal for somebody who rushed in really quickly to get something and then rushed back on the train because the train was waiting for nobody. And it was him who conceived this idea of coming up with restaurants at depots across the United States. And so he teams up with the Santa Fe Railroad to pull together all these restaurants. But it's not just restaurants. That's not it. It was going to be fine food in very clean atmosphere, waited on by women in black skirts, very pristine white shirts, and very starched aprons. That's who's going to wait on you. My favorite quote from Will Rogers about the Harvey Girls, because that's what these ladies were called, was, Will Rogers said the Harvey Girls kept the West in food and wives, because a lot of these women who hired on, and you'd have to sign a contract to hire on with the Harvey Girls. You couldn't just go down and say, I want to wait tables. That wasn't it. You had to pass a test. You had to promise that you were going to be in every night and not gallivanting around. You had to say what your intended focus was. Some women wanted to get married, and so they worked the Harvey houses and decided to come west, hoping that they would meet the man of their dreams. Some women wanted to go to school, so they signed contracts with the Harvey House to work for them so they could gain money to put aside to go to school. So you had women from all walks of life and all reasons to hire on with the Harvey Girls. This is one of my favorite stories. In 1897, 27-year-old Mabel Sloan of Florence, Kansas, responded to an ad in the local paper. Looking for work, she was intrigued by the notice that said, "Wanted, young women 18 to 30 years of age, of good character, attractive and intelligent, as waitresses in Harvey eating houses in the West. Good wages with room and means, and your rooms will be furnished." Despite her mother's objections of women don't hold jobs outside the home, Mabel responded to the advertisement and accepted a position as one of entrepreneur Fred Harvey's growing number of counter girls in his restaurants across the country. After a vigorous training period, Mabel was sent to waitress at the Casa del Deserto House of the Desert in Barstow, California. For several months, Mabel served the men and women who traveled through the area on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad. Dressed in her neat black dress, crisp, starched white apron, she tended to customers' culinary needs and made sure their dining experience lacked for nothing. Homer Pike, a farmer in his late 40s from Hamilton, Montana, was one of the patrons who visited the Harvey House in early 1898, where Mabel was employed. Homer was known among his friends as being frugal. He did his own cooking, washed and mended his own clothes, and refused to buy any additional clothing, even though the fabric was thin and fading on the garments that he owned. It was rumored he had plenty of money, but spent little, if nothing, on frivolity. He showed no interest in women or marriage, and spent a great deal of time by himself, until Mabel, waiting on him at the restaurant, and his friends, until Mabel, waiting on him at the restaurant, his friends and family anticipated that he would die a bachelor. He showed no interest, as I said, in women, so they were quite amazed by this. So according to an article on May 16, 1899, Horace was smitten with Mabel the moment she brought him a cup of coffee. The two exchanged pleasantries, and after 3 days, he dared to ask Mabel to take a walk with him. She agreed, and 2 days later, the pair decided to marry. Mabel resigned her position from Fred Harvey, relocated to Montana, and lived out the rest of her life with Homer, who showered her with affections and spoiled her with all the things his money could buy. Now, those are the kinds of things that some of the Harvey girls came west. They really wanted that life. It didn't always work out like that, but that's the life that they wanted. It just happened to work out that way for Mabel and Homer. And since that was a real story, I just had to include it in the book. As I said, these ladies had to go through rigorous training. And when the restaurants and the Harvey Girls really took hold, they marketed everything that the Harvey Girls did. Their clothing, you could go and you could buy a Harvey Girl outfit if you want to. Their hair had to be a certain way. You could go now to the beauty parlor and get your hair done like the Harvey Girls. They sold, even into the late 1920s, they would sell garments like this, but they would modernize them. They would make them more modern by raising the hem of the dress. So everything that the Harvey Girls did was marketable. So it was a huge franchise. And it was incredibly successful. Those women were the mainstay for people traveling from one part of the country to the next. And everything was always uniform in the same restaurants, kind of like what McDonald's patterned their business model after, which was you could go to a McDonald's in Cleveland, it's the same McDonald's in Winslow, Arizona. It was the same way for Harvey House. They wanted people to feel at home. And it was good cooking for very reasonable prices. And people were excited about it. It really took hold. Now, it wouldn't have taken hold as much had the diners, the restaurants, the depots, everything associated with Harvey House and the Santa Fe Railroad, had it not looked aesthetically pleasing. And for that, we've turned to, let me show you a picture of the Harvey. This is some of the Harvey Girls. I think this is so sweet. They roomed together and they had like kind of a big dorm. If you ever seen the Harvey Girls with Judy Garland, it was exactly like that. Just kidding. Nobody was breaking into song at a moment's notice with Angela Lansbury, but the Harvey houses were very pristine and everything was very well clean. There was no, we didn't walk away and say, oh, this counter is really sticky. That wasn't what the Harvey houses were about. So these women really did make a significant impact on the railroad. But as I said, it all had to be aesthetically pleasing. And for that, we come to a woman by the name of Mary Coulter. And Mary Coulter was an architect and an artist, and one of the very first female architects hired in the West by Fred Harvey to design the interior of all of his depots, all of his restaurants. Some of those things are still standing. As a matter of fact, if you go to the Grand Canyon and you go to the Watchtower and many of the other structures there, they were all designed by Mary Coulter, who was hugely influenced by the Hopi Nation. So she brought into everything that she did, she brought some of that Native American inspiration into everything that she designed. But she was remarkable. This is one of the hotels that she designed in New Mexico. So when people they would take the train, they would get to the depot, they would need to stay there overnight. This is one of the wonderful places that she designed. She designed the amazing depot in Kansas City, Missouri, where she put in marble pillars, and she made the counter this amazing marble. She made sure that when you go to Kansas City, if you've been to that amazing depot, that the height of the depot is so expansive. She wanted people to feel a sense of freedom. She was incredibly talented, but it made people want to take the train. It made them want to go from point A to point B. As I said, prior to that, you didn't see any of that going on. It probably eventually would have happened, but not a lot of men would have focused on those parts of it. It was Fred Harvey who saw the beauty in this. One of the other ladies that I write about in the book, she was an artist as well, and she worked for the Santa Fe Railroad when they started doing what they call a sky dome on the train, where they opened up the top of it and put glass over it so you could travel and feel like you were out underneath the stars. Well, that wasn't enough. Harvey ended up hiring different artists to come in and do these amazing murals Western murals. So people would think, I've got to get myself really thinking about the West, because I'm going West. And even after World War I, the Harvey Girls, or women, were very instrumental because World War I really decimated train travel. Everybody was off fighting. There wasn't anybody here to take the train. And so when the war was over, they had to really ignite train travel. And the Harvey Houses did that. And Harvey came up, his company came up with an idea called the Harvey Courier Corps, which was when you took the train all the way to the Grand Canyon, you could stop and see more of the scenic areas by getting into a car that was driven by other Harvey Girls, not dressed like this, but dressed in Southwestern garb. And so they would take you all around and they would show you the sights, you and your family. And they opened up the West. And they populated the West. And they made it attractive for people who want to come out this way. So, as I said, these women did amazing things. And one of the things I didn't touch on were these incredible women who were the telegraph operators, and how quickly they had to listen to the messages from an incoming train and relay that again to a train coming this way, how quickly they had to do that. And they had to be tested to do this. And sometimes the testing involved these women being in a room, you'd be in a room by yourself, and there'd be maybe 25, 30 telegraph machines going, and you'd have to focus on your telegraph machine. And the really good ones would do that, and the really good ones traveled everywhere. And some of these women that were so good got to even meet one of the, and it was really a man's position. When women started doing this, people were outraged, but women came on and they could decipher and work on many more machines than men could work on, including one of the men that was a telegraph operator who really didn't pay very much attention to it because he was really a singer and that's really what he wanted to do. So when he would get off work, he would go to different places and sing. But they put up with that from Gene Autry. And I think that that's really amazing, how these women really were very, very savvy business-wise and could do a lot of things to make the American railroad system what it is today. So the book is called Iron Women, Ladies Who Built the American Railroad. The book is out next month. You can go onto my site, which is chrisenss.com. That's CHRISENSS.com. And you can read a little bit more about it. I'm doing a giveaway this month. If you go on my site, you can register to win a book. And at the end of the month, I'm giving away a book. I'm giving away a book again next month. This book is available at the bookseller. It's also available on Amazon. Thank you guys very much for listening. I really appreciate it. Thank you.